On December 6, 2025, what began as routine shadows over the East China Sea turned into a cockpit nightmare as a Chinese J-15 locked fire control radar onto a Japanese F-15, triggering the kind of alarm that means someone could pull the trigger now. In less than 3 hours, a second Japanese jet found itself tracked, this time for 30 relentless minutes. This marked the first time China's carrier aviation had crossed this red line in full view of the world. But now that the final warning step has become just another maneuver, what happens when the next pilot makes a different choice? Alarms blared inside the F-15's cockpit as the radar warning receiver lit up, warning the pilot that a Chinese J-15 had switched from scanning to targeting. In those moments southeast of Okinawa, the distinction between routine tracking and imminent danger was no longer theoretical. Search radar sweeps the sky, scanning for anything that moves, but fire control radar is different. It narrows to a single target, locking on and feeding precise data needed to guide a missile. For a pilot, the threat receiver's steady tone means one thing: someone has you in their sights, and the next step could be a launch. The J-15's radar, derived from Russian designs but upgraded with Chinese technology, is built to track and kill. When it switches to fire control mode, it sends a focused beam that tells the F-15's sensors and the pilot that this is no longer a drill. Defensive maneuvers become instinctive. The pilot radios Naha Air Base, reporting a lock, while monitoring every movement on the scope. Standard procedure calls for chaff and flare readiness, and a constant watch for any sign of a missile leaving the rail. Military doctrine treats this radar lock as the electronic equivalent of cocking a loaded gun in a standoff. In peacetime, it's a message that the rules can change in an instant. Japan's Ministry of Defense confirmed that this was the first time a carrier-based Chinese fighter had used fire control radar against a Japanese aircraft. The memory of January 2013 still lingers when a Chinese frigate locked its radar on a Japanese destroyer and Beijing denied it ever happened. Now the escalation has moved from ships to fighters, and from the sea's surface to the contested air above. For 3 minutes, the F-15 was held at risk. No weapons fired, no airspace breached, but the meaning was clear. Fire control radar is not a warning, it is the last step before a shot. In that cockpit, the line between routine and crisis vanished as the lock held steady and every second stretched long. At 6:37 p.m., a second Japanese F-15 came under fire control radar lock, this time for more than 30 minutes. The threat receiver's alarm became a constant companion as the J-15's targeting beam tracked every move. Unlike the first incident, which lasted only minutes, this prolonged lock left no doubt about intent. The F-15 maintained its patrol pattern, but the pilot now faced a persistent electronic crosshair, every maneuver shadowed, every altitude change mirrored by the Chinese fighter. Overhead, Liaoning's air wing kept up a relentless tempo. In just 48 hours, the carrier launched nearly 100 sorties, fighters, early warning planes, and helicopters cycling off the deck in tightly coordinated waves. Below the carrier's escorts, a Type 055 destroyer and two Type 052D destroyers formed a moving wall of sensors and missile tubes, their radars netted together to extend the group's reach. The Type 055, China's largest and most advanced surface combatant, provided long-range air defense and command. The Type 052Ds, each bristling with phased array radars, tracked both aircraft and surface threats. Together, they created a protective bubble around Liaoning, allowing J-15s to operate aggressively, knowing the fleet's sensors and missiles could back them up in seconds. For Japan's Ministry of Defense, the second sustained lock crossed a new threshold. This was not a fleeting provocation or a technical glitch. It was the first time Tokyo formally disclosed that Chinese carrier-based aircraft had used fire control radar against Japanese fighters, a line that until now had only been crossed at sea. The wording was precise. The radar lock constituted a dangerous act that exceeds the scope necessary for the safe flight of aircraft. With 2 separate F-15s targeted in one day, and the lock holding for 30 minutes, the message was impossible to ignore. The escalation was operational, deliberate, and fully supported by the strike group's networked capability. The next move would not come from the cockpit, but from the government in Tokyo. Tokyo's response came swiftly, even as most of the city slept. Within hours of the second radar lock, Japan's Ministry of Defense issued a public statement. Defense Minister Shinjiro Koizumi denounced the Chinese J-15's actions as a dangerous act that exceeds the scope necessary for the safe flight of aircraft. The language was deliberate. This was not routine airspace friction, but a formal accusation that China had crossed the line. Koizumi's words echoed through newswires and into allied capitals, signaling that Japan would not let the incident pass quietly. A strong diplomatic protest followed. The Chinese ambassador Wu Jianghao was summoned to the foreign ministry. Behind closed doors, Japanese officials demanded an explanation and called for immediate steps to prevent a repeat. The phrasing "dangerous and beyond what is necessary" was chosen to leave no ambiguity about Tokyo's view of the risk. Chief Cabinet Secretary Hirokazu Kihara reinforced the message, stating that the Japanese F-15s had maintained a safe distance and acted within international norms. Any suggestion that Japan had provoked the encounter was flatly rejected. The urgency of the moment was not lost on Japan's closest partners. In Tokyo that night, Australian Defense Minister Richard Marles was present for scheduled security talks. The timing meant that Australia was briefed in real time, and both countries' defense chiefs issued a joint call for restraint while reaffirming their commitment to regional stability. Within the ruling Liberal Democratic Party, lawmakers convened an emergency meeting, warning that the radar locks represented a new level of risk in the East China Sea. The official statements, the protests, and the Allied coordination all underscored one point: Japan viewed the incident not as an isolated provocation, but as a test of resolve. The diplomatic machinery was now fully engaged, even as Beijing prepared its own version of events. Beijing's response landed with practiced precision. Official statements accused Japanese pilots of deliberately shadowing and disrupting lawful training, insisting Chinese forces were conducting routine, pre-announced exercises in international waters. The language was familiar. Japan, not China, was blamed for endangering flight safety, with spokespeople saying Japanese jets had repeatedly approached and disrupted the carrier's operations. There was no mention of fire control radar or the specifics of the lock-ons. Just a steady drumbeat of counter-accusations and calls for Tokyo to stop smearing China's military. Behind the rhetoric, the scale of China's presence was impossible to overlook. Over 100 Chinese Navy and Coast Guard vessels spread from the Yellow Sea through the South China Sea and out into the Pacific. This was the largest maritime deployment on record, with the Liaoning strike group at its core, including one Type 055 destroyer, two Type 052D destroyers, and a full air wing of J-15 fighters. The message was clear: China could project power across every axis, and it was prepared to do so for weeks at a time. Japan's response was visible not just in words, but in numbers. In fiscal year 2024, Japanese fighters scrambled 464 times against Chinese aircraft, 2/3 of all scrambles for the year. These intercepts, once rare, had become routine, but fire control radar illumination was something else entirely. It was a direct step up the escalation ladder, the last act before a missile leaves the rail. The J-15, derived from Russia's Su-33 and now equipped with active phased array radar and PL-15 long-range missiles, could hold an F-15 at risk from beyond visual range. Each lock, each scramble, each sortie added weight to the risk that a single miscalculation could spark a crisis. While Tokyo and Beijing traded statements, the operational tempo around Okinawa remained high. The Liaoning's aircraft launched wave after wave, and Japanese F-15s continued their patrols. Each side watched for the next move, knowing the line between routine and rupture had grown dangerously thin. Today, fire control radar is no longer a red line. It is a signal pulsing in contested skies. As military postures harden, one misread moment could redraw Asia's balance overnight. Deterrence depends on restraint, but restraint is vanishing. The next decision in the cockpit may not come with warning.